Game 3 of the World Chess Championship in New York between Carlsen and Karjakin is in the books, and here is what happened. Definitely our most exciting game so far, so if you don't know the result and you're on the edge of your seat right now, seeing it for the first time, you are in for a treat. After bishop to b5, we had our first Berlin, so you might be thinking, Danny just said this was the most exciting game and I don't know the result. What happened here? Well, this Berlin did not disappoint, despite the potentially disappointing start. Not only did we get a Berlin, but Carlsen didn't play d3, which these days is pretty much accepted by all top grandmasters as the most dynamic and flexible way to play. You avoid all the forcing variations of the Berlin endgame. It's what Vishy Anand played against Carlsen when he had the white side of the Berlin, and what Carlsen did against Vishy Anand in their world championship just a couple years ago. So, but Carlsen didn't. He played castles, and then not only did he not meet knight takes e4 with d4, also still accepted, I think, as white's better winning chances to get that Berlin ending, he played rook e1. But as we saw in the press conference afterwards, Magnus Carlsen confirmed that this was exactly what he wanted, the kind of position he knows he's the best in the world at, which is a tiny edge, a peaceful position with a slight pull, where he feels like he can outplay people with just chess skills. And so after rook e1, knight d6, and takes, this is how the variation goes. Don't ever take on b5 unless you are prepared to resign to a discovered check, #pro tip. So of course that didn't happen. Bishop e7 happened, and we're going to get trades on the e-file nonetheless. And one of the things that makes this position so boring, quote unquote, is that you're looking at a structure with absolutely no dynamic pull, no differences. It's completely symmetrical other than one side having the pawn on d4 versus d7. That development difference does make a little bit of a difference. It forces black to kind of come up with new ways to get the bishop out. But overall, these positions are very tame, not a lot of fire on the board. Again, we're still waiting for Danny to tell us how this game got so exciting, but I have not revealed the result yet, and don't worry, I won't. We're gonna get there now, and it starts with Carlsen playing the first sort of weird, surprising move, rook to e2. My man, Grandmaster Bobby Hess, who once again, of course, we have to bring up his beautiful face and remind everybody that a lot of the analysis here originally done by him before I add my own educational twist for beginners and lower level players. Thank you, Robert. He gave this 2 exclams, which of course is completely ridiculous, but he did give it 2 exclams for it being just a complete psychological blow to Karjakin to play such a weird move in this position. The move rook to e1 has been played 672 times. The move rook to e2 has been played 5 times and never by anybody worth their salt. Also, for the 3rd game in a row, Carlsen is the one who deviated first. So for someone who doesn't really pack a lot of punch in terms of his opening repertoire, not Carlsen's game. And for Karjakin, the dreaded, feared Russian preparation we've all been waiting for. Right now, Karjakin has been the one sort of on his toes, having to figure out his way through openings he hasn't seen before. And so Carlsen gets 2 exclams from Bobby for that. It's an interesting idea. Let me explain what the idea is about. Although before I do, I'll say that rook e1 is not a bad move at all. In fact, the last time Carlsen had this position, he actually played it against Kramnik and went on to have a very nice position. As the position simplified, he eventually had an advantage on the e-file. And okay, so that was a game that he could have played. But again, Carlsen not interested in that. Plays rook e2. But the idea, as we're going to see in a variation that goes, let's say something like after knight f5. If c3 and then d5, and we see bishop f4, bishop to g5, or sorry, not d5, d6. Bishop f4, bishop g5, and the trade happens. One of the things that can happen in this line is that eventually, as development is completed, white has the ability to quickly get both rooks to the e-file in a way that's much more efficient than having this rook on e1 and now having to waste the tempo. So as crazy or deep as that idea seems, that's sort of the point of rook e2, is that if black tries to play the normal Berlin, moving the knight and bringing the bishop out to the standard way toward the center, maybe white has chances to double rooks quickly and take advantage of the only open file. So that sort of forces black's hand into playing b6, which threatens bishop a6, the other way to get developed. And again, bishop a6 would lead to a bunch of trades and a peaceful result. But as I said, this game gets exciting. Now Carlsen plays rook e1. So he just literally played rook e2 to induce b6 and then rook e1. Are you serious, right? But his point is, he believes that b6 is in the long term is a move black wishes he could have back, and maybe creates opportunities for white to attack weaknesses on the queen side. You know, I think from a psychological perspective, he was setting the tone, as Robert said, but the truth is, objectively, nothing really happened here other than a bunch of trades, as now Karjakin said, you know what, enough shenanigans on the e-file, let's trade pieces, buddy. And that's exactly what he does here. He plays rook e8, we get a trade, and the queen trade is offered, and once again, we are in another endgame, and we're ready to play. The game is not over. White played a4 now, the threat of a5, an important threat which forces a6. This is a good pro tip for everyone to put in their pocket. Sometimes when you're dealing with the threat of a pawn push that might open a file for your opponent or maybe threaten a6 and create some problems, one of the ways to deal with that is to push your pawn all the way and just stop it. But now you've fully committed, and maybe this b5 square becomes open and available for different pieces and for some different targets. In fact, there's even ideas where this might occur immediately. Are you going to let me double your pawns, or are you going to let me win this pawn? So, and bishop f4 would be met by g3, and again, you're going to lose this pawn. So if you can't deal with this pawn advancement by you know, sort of grabbing the bull by the horns, a6 is a flexible move, because now black fully intends to meet a5 with b5. So what you do there is you create a defensive anchor, and you're ready to meet the pawn push by countering with a pawn push, so that makes white also want to kind of sit tight. Little bit of an instructive point there. After g3 and g5, the main point is that we're going to get a bunch of trades further, because all Carlsen really wants is one dynamic difference in the entire game, a knight versus bishop struggle. Can I outplay you with a piece that can hop around and change colors and create new targets? Or will the position become open enough where this bishop gets to flex its muscles on both sides of the board? That's the struggle we're going to get in this game, and that's exactly what we had. Karjakin plays f5 to immediately activate the king, and the truth is, again, all things considered, despite Carlsen's favoring of this position, he wants this position, we know that, because it's the kind of game with a slight pull that's peaceful, he can outplay his opponents. But still, Karjakin is also one of the best defenders in the world, and he's ready to play positions where he's a little bit worse and say, all right, you know, I think I can defend these positions. Knight to e3 is played again. We're doing with the knight exactly as I've highlighted. We're maneuvering the knight around. We're switching colors and trying to poke fun at things and create opportunities and tactics. Karjakin not interested in the rook ending if he has to double his pawn, so he retreats, and now that gives me the open file if I'm white. f4 is a good move in the sense that it's a risk always to put your pawns on the same color as your opponent's bishop. But when you have a knight and not a bishop, if you're fixing your opponent's pawns on the opposite color of the bishop, that also means you're now putting a pawn in a position where the bishop cannot help with defense. So that's the balance, right? If you risk putting your own pawns on the same color as a bishop, you may give your opponent targets. But if you can fixate a weakness that's on the opposite color, now if this knight and rook can somehow gang up, black is playing with less defenders to our attackers if you're white. So that's the idea to keep in mind, and always to evaluate those things in your own games as you try to outplay your opponents in endgames, because remember, the person who wins an equal ending is the person who plays better. Not all equal endings are draws. And this game is on the way to proving that. Still didn't give you the result, okay? After b5, we get takes and bake, and now knight e3. The knight is headed exactly to the square I said we would. And after king to f3 and rook a8, the rook gets to the g file, and just as we predicted, we have a doubling up coming up here on the pawn. It's tricky. If you're black, you want to keep your pawns on these opposite color squares as the bishop, because together your pawns and your bishop are keeping the knight at bay. But you also want to create counterplay and open lines for your bishop. A tough position for Karjakin here ensued, and he was under time pressure. So what did he do? He started making mistakes. First with rook a2. The rook doesn't belong there. Okay, that sounds weird, right? Like, hey, you can't sit here. Can't sit here. Forrest Gump reference. Wait, that's not the right accent. Can't sit here. I'm struggling with my Greenbow, Alabama references. Sorry, sidetrack. But the rook doesn't belong here, okay? He's not going to get the counterplay that he needs, and the rook is going to eventually want to swing back. But it's really the next move that's the big blunder, because both in this position here and in this position, if black plays bishop h6 and guards the threat of g5, there really isn't a concrete way for white to break down just yet. The line we analyzed was with d5, and after the rook comes back, we swing and try to get to the d file. But it seems that black is getting now targeting the f pawn, as we said would be his advantage, in time to sort of compete with white. The analysis isn't clear, but at least there's counterplay there. the other idea for white is not d5, but actually the rook lift to try to come here. That pokes fun at a bishop that's sort of in an awkward position, and if you try to defend with the king, maybe we can take on f5 with the knight and overload it. White is still holding the cards, make no mistake about it, but black is in decent shape to defend. But it was in this moment where Karjakin kind of struggled and decided he needed aggressive counterplay to deal with the fact that he was losing the pawn, and he played c5. This move is now leading to a series of forced moves that end up giving Karjakin, or giving Carlsen, an extra pawn advantage. Starts with rook to g8 to gain a tempo, and after king f7, now the f5 pawn is hanging, we come right back to hold on to this pawn, relieving the pony of its duties, and we gobble f5. The problem for you, the d4 pawn's falling, but here's where Karjakin is a genius. He knows when he's under fire. He knows he's now playing for one result, that being a draw is his only thing he can get. Carlsen's playing for two results, a win or a draw, but Karjakin is ready to defend. He plays d3. Not only is it a good move because you're going to lose a weak pawn anyway, note that trying to defend this with a bad bishop, bad pawn is probably just going to get the king in some kind of mating net as this guy and the rooks come up. This is going to get ugly for black. So d3 is played. He gives up the pawn, but in doing so, he also separates white's pawns, which is really critical for the future of this game. After the knight comes to d4, black plays b4. He wants to make sure this bishop can defend and defend the king, the critical mating net squares at the same time. Rook to g5, rook b1. We get this check, and it was at this point that I was honestly chatting with the members live in chess.com TV, calling for black's head. I was sure Carlsen is going to win this game, and I believe I'm right to think that. Still not revealing the result. Okay, he may have won this game. He may not have. You don't know. But this position just seems like white is on his way. You are up a pawn, and you have dominant pieces and a dominant king. This should be winning for white. Rook e1 check, king f5, rook d1. But Karjakin's pesky, and he's not going to go away. Rook to e5 check and rook to d5 forces the hand where we get the d3 pawn traded for the d7 pawn. Now this position still seems more than precarious for black. After rook e5 check, rook to e2 guarding the h2 pawn, bishop to g7, and knight to c6. We're in a tough spot if we're black. You're down the f-pawn. There are all kinds of threats like, why can't I go take this? Well, because you're going to get mated. Knight d8 check. The only move is king f8. If king to g8, we give a little check-a-rooski, and then a little mate town is going to occur town on f8 town. So after king f8, we'd have another check. You can't go to the g file. You will always lose the bishop, which means you're forced to retreat again. We repeat again. You still can't go here, still because of rook e8. So we continue to go for lines where white is just checking and picking up pawns. Eventually, the king comes into g6, and black is mated within a couple moves. So you're literally looking at a position where black is totally against the wall. This looks to be losing. Down the pawn, the mating net's coming. But Karjakin does not go away. He plays rook h5 check. And then he swings the rook very patiently to its most active defensive square, where it not only makes white's life difficult to push f5, after, for example, knight d8 check and king g6, f5 is stopped. It also, for the first time, threatens h5 check, where, for the first time in this endgame, white's pieces start to get pushed back, and black's pieces start coming forward. Things are changing. Things are shifting. After the king comes to e4, still the b3 pawn, just not capturable, by the way, because of rook g2 check. Never miss basic tactics. After bishop f6, rook e3 defends the pawn. I'm not sure if white is winning in this endgame. I'll be totally honest with you. I'm a little tired. This has been like a 6.5-hour game. We've done a lot of coverage here. I'm sticking this out for you, the fans, who don't know the game and you want this educational review. And I'll give, on the point of education, let's give the fans a tip that you really don't want to, if you think you've made progress holding in the rock-solid way you have, you want to hold your ground. Transitioning into an endgame, if you haven't calculated for sure it's a draw, probably you shouldn't trade, which is really the opposite of what most amateurs and beginners do, so you should learn from that. They trade down, always assuming that less pieces is getting them closer to a draw, and it's just not the case, and Karjakin doesn't do that. He plays h4 to take away the threat of rook g3 check, and now after rook to e1, the truth is, with the king and bishop sitting very solidly right where they are, and this rook holding the 4th rank, this position here probably should have been a draw. Karjakin has defended incredibly well. But unfortunately, it is a game, not a science, and he makes another mistake. Here he plays the move bishop to g5. Why is this important? Without the bishop on g5, the idea that Carlsen had wouldn't have worked in the game. If he does anything else, something like rook e4 to cut off the rook's protection, so that this king can start coming in doesn't work because I'm not attacking the bishop. And so you can start gobbling, creating counterplay on your own. But in the game, Karjakin played bishop g5, which allowed rook e4. Now I come here with tempo, and suddenly your rook is trapped, unable to take these pawns that you would like because I'm going to take the bishop. Black is once again on his heels. The bishop comes back to e7, and he has calculated a key idea, a theme that's going to be important for the rest of this game. He intends to capture this pawn and to sacrifice the bishop, thinking that in variations like this, he's going to get a whole bunch of pawns. And if you know anything about theoretical endings, you know that a rook and knight cannot beat a rook straight up. So as long as black wins this pawn, which he's going to, you can even lose both these pawns, and it's going to be a draw. The problem that he missed, and we're 100% sure of this, the live Chess Center show we did with Nazi Pakizi, if you're not watching our live Chess Center shows every day on Chess TV at 5 p.m. Pacific after the game, you're missing out. The idea that he missed for sure was that in this line, White is not going to take right away. White has an intermezzo, a Zwischenzug, yeah? He has the check, yeah, and then we capture this one, because now when you take it, I get the check here, yeah? And your king is forced to walk right into the fork. Yeah, everyone wants to ride my Yaris. So this was what Karjakin missed, and this is where the whole thing changed. Because once this check occurs, and Carlsen started entering, for sure this is going to be a one game, right? I mean, now you have an extra pawn. The rook and knight are dominant. Not going anywhere for a while. I got a mating net coming. And after rook takes h3 check in here, I was like, what? Right? I mean, the bishop's hanging, and there's got to be a win here. For sure. After takes, and then knight to c6 to guard both, there was a win here. But this moment here was critical. We get an endgame similar to what we just calculated. Black has gotten 2 pawns for the bishop, and indeed, this pawn is hanging. The problem is, you can't take that pawn as long as there's a fork here. But White has to find a way to guard this pawn and deal with the potential passed h-pawn. And there's really only one accurate plan to do it. There may have been different ways to win. The computer, I'm sure, would have multiple because I'm not an engine. But I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. And what I do know is before you can calculate complicated variations, you have to establish what are the ideal places for my pieces, ideally. Forget if I can put them there now. If it works concretely, I'll figure that out. Before I make it work, what am I trying to make work? And this is where Carlsen lost his way. He was under time pressure, and it's easy for us to criticize, but it has been analyzed a lot now, and we're pretty sure that this plan that he chose went the wrong way because he overestimated the need to win the b pawn and to hold on to his pawn, and underestimated the need to protect against the h-pawn pushing. And again, if you haven't seen the game, I hope this analysis is blowing your mind right now, because this is really the key moment. The first key moment was this move, exclamaviach, boom, rook e1. You can't take, because that's a fork. The rook on e1 is going to be more useful for stopping this pawn than anywhere else on the board. If a move like rook to c3 is played, now we give check. You still can't play king f4, by the way, because check-a-ruski, that's a fork. And after king f6, I'm just gobbling the pawn. Rook to d3, rook e4. And black's king is helpless to do what it wants to do. Gonna be a win. Also, after rook to e1, there's really not any other way to go about that. If you voluntarily move the king, we have similar issues here. As we did before, actually. In fact, there's a couple of different ways it can go. One is knight to d4, and after rook e6, we have moves like knight to e6. Actually, I think the easiest is knight here check, followed by knight here, and put the rook and knight together on the first rank, where again the king cannot enter it, and white will be able to catch up with the h-pawn. In fact, here I don't voluntarily need to play rook d1. I just wait for you to attack me. I would just take the pawn right away. So again, the complications are there. Of course, you can all analyze it with a free engine as you have, but the ideals that were missed were just understanding how important it was to stop the h-pawn, not to protect this pawn. The other move instead of knight a5 that could have been a little bit better was also just knight d4 right away, again with similar intentions as what we're talking about, making sure we get the knight back to help with the pawn. Carlsen didn't. He played knight a5. Yes, it defends b3, and yes, he ensured that he was going to win the b-pawn, but here's what he missed. After rook to b7, we're not pushing h3. We're playing rook a1 first, exclam, hitting the knight, and we're allowing you to take the b4 pawn with check, because when this king gets to g3, you've actually still not solved the problem of how do you deal with the awkwardness over here and stop the pawn. Rook to g4 check was played, and then the move knight to c4 came in. But after h3, white suddenly realized there was no way to deal with the threat of the queen and get the knight back in time. He played rook h4 and played a little bit of tickle, but after a second time, the draw was agreed, and now you finally know the result. An amazing game, a back-and-forth affair, really one-sided from the perspective that Magnus Carlsen was pushing, showed the best of Magnus Carlsen, and then unfortunately came up just short with, I don't know if it's the worst of Magnus Carlsen or just couldn't quite figure out the right setup under time pressure. But Karjakin showed the best of Karjakin in the sense of his ability to defend worse positions. He has still not shown that he can put Magnus on his heels, and that's why the match right now seems to be favoring the world champion. But this was a big game either way. Psychologically, you're happy that you're Sergey Karjakin because you're still even in the match. But Magnus Carlsen, you're happy because you showed you can win and you can outplay somebody from basically a relatively harmless endgame. You can completely outplay them and reach this position that was really one wrong idea, one wrong idea away, this knight coming to a5, from just winning the game on the spot with a move like rook to e1. So we thank you for joining and watching my post-game recap here. The video here is a little longer than the previous ones. That's because the game was more complex. As the game changes, don't hate the player, hate the game. And we are diving in. We are going to bring you all the educational analysis you can. We are going to go to bed right now and sign off and say toodaloo. Give me a like, please. Give me a share. Be nice, be kind, appreciate one another in the world, and let's all grow as human beings. That's just, I don't know, random weird message that just came out of my brain. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you for Game 4.